Exodus chapter 14. Exodus chapter 14. We want to look at verses 29 through 31. But we're going to teach from verses 15 through 28. We'll look at verses 29 as our theme passage, but we'll reference verses 15 through 28. Exodus chapter 14, verse 29. But the Israelites went through the sea on dry ground, with a wall of water on their right and on their left. That day the Lord saved Israel from the hands of the Egyptians. And Israel saw the Egyptians lying dead on the shore. And when the Israelites saw the great power the Lord displayed against the Egyptians, the people feared the Lord and put their trust in him and in Moses, his servant. I want to preach today from the subject, I was made to believe. I was made to believe. Looking at the 14th chapter of this Old Testament book of Exodus, towards the end of said chapter is where there is some vital and life-changing information on believing in God. And let me start out by saying that many times most of us in this room have had to go through something to believe in the Lord. Your belief in him did not come by happenstance. It didn't just happen when you were born, but through trials and tribulations, you have been made to believe in the Lord. Let's be honest and admit that we haven't always believed like we should believe. We've gone through a period of struggle, sickness, pain, agony, and even defeat before we could see that God was truly with us. And that's where the Israelites were, Jake Ball, during the time of this writing. They were, if you will, caught up in a situation whereby they had no other choice but to see the salvation the Lord would give them. In other words, they had nobody else to lean on but God. Moses, so the Bible says, had led them out of Egypt and gotten them as far as the Red Sea. But at the same time, the enemy was hot on their trail. With the Red Sea in front of them and Pharaoh behind them, what were the Israelites to do? And that's a good question for us to discuss today. How many times have we ourselves been caught with a Red Sea in front of us and the enemy down behind us? How many times have we ourselves been the victim of trying to get away or get to something better in life in one breath, and the enemy was, if you will, trying to catch us in the other breath? I need to point out today that there will be times in our lives when we will be caught between the proverbial rock and a hard place. There's not a whole lot we can do about it except wait on the salvation of God to see us through. And then the challenging part here is that to somebody, because you at one point in time have found yourself going through a period whereby you needed somebody to help you get through, or to help you get past, or to help you get over whatever it was that you were facing. And that's when God stepped in. Anybody know anything about God stepping in? Anybody know anything about God making ways? Anybody know anything about God changing things around, moving things around, turning things around? God has a way of turning our situation in a manner where we never thought. I never dreamed it would turn out this way. I never thought things would be like they are. I never thought we would get back in where we are. I never thought things would go the way they're going. But because of God's grace, somebody ought to help your boy preach. God has so many times took our hand and saw us through whatever it was that we were facing. And that's what he did right here for the Israelites. He came in, used Moses as his instrument. And thusly the Israelites were made to believe because of what the Lord did for them right in front of their very face and eyes. Moses was commanded in Exodus 14:15. Give it to me, guys, if you can find it. To stop crying out to God. Get on the move. Look at it, if you will. Then the Lord said to Moses, why are you crying out to me? Tell the Israelites to move on. And what we need to see right here is the fact that there is a time for prayer. And there is a time for action. And sometimes our belief process will not develop, somebody ought to hear me, until we get up and act on the prayers. Yeah, I know y'all don't want to hear that. You take great joy in being able to say, I prayed about my problem. I got on my knees. I called on the Lord. But when was the last time that you got up off your knees and started working towards the answer that you needed God to provide? Some of you would not be where you are today in life if all you did was pray. Some of us would not have a clear picture and would not have what we have, be where we are, work where we work, and achieve what we have achieved and what we presently are achieving if we hadn't got up off our knees and started to act on the prayers that we had been praying. Now, I'm not telling you not to pray. But what I am telling you is that once you've gotten through praying, you ought to begin to walk in the answer that you've been praying for. You ought to begin to at least believe that you're blessed, believe that you're healed, believe that you're delivered, believe that your daughter or son is going to change you. Once you've gotten through praying, you ought to start believing that God is going to make a way. These Israelites had prayed to the Lord. The Bible says they cried out to him, but in the same breath they fussed and they cussed, they murmured and they complained because they did not believe that the God they were praying to was able to see them through. And if we are to be believers today in what God can do for us, number one, guys, give it to me if you can find it. We must, if you will, first and foremost, put our prayers into action. Moses couldn't just stay there and call on the name of the Lord as they did in Exodus 14:10. In the latter portion of said verse, there had to be a time whereby the people would begin to step out on the prayers. They had to pray and begin to trust God to see them through. Anybody ever had to trust God before? Anybody ever had nothing else to lean on but God? You're laying on your sick bed and looking at the ceiling and the walls, and God was the only one who could come to your rescue. Your children were crazy. Your marriage was crazy. Your job had flipped upside down, and the only thing you had to wait on was God because nobody else could see you through. You and I would never get where we need to get in life if we don't learn right here and now to step out on faith. Utilize the prayers that we've prayed and begin to trust in the God that we've been praying to. Some of us have been praying year after year, month after month, week in and week out. You have literally worn out a certain place in front of your bed with your kneecaps, praying for a certain issue, and not one time have we gotten up and begun to put our prayers into action. Not one time have we gotten up violent and begin to trust God by stepping out on faith and working towards the answer that we've been praying for. The Israelites couldn't just stand there and pray, watch the enemy come up behind them and the water in front of them. The time had come for them to put their prayer into action. And that's where some of us are this afternoon. We have come to a point in life whereby we need to get up off our knees and start working on our situation while at the same time learning how to trust God to see us through. And when we trust the Lord, when we get up and start putting our prayer into action, God then begins to work on the case for us. He begins to do what our grandparents testified about. If you make one step, God will. If you don't believe me, look at Exodus 14:16 through 18, where we see this old traditional statement come into play. Look at it, if you will, as God speaks to Moses. He tells him, raise your staff, stretch out your hand over the sea and divide the water so that the Israelites can go through the sea on dry ground. I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians so that they will go in after them, and I will gain glory through his chariots and his horsemen. The Egyptians will know that I am the Lord. When I gain glory through Pharaoh, his chariots, and his horsemen. Moses is given the command by God to lay the foundation for what would be one of the greatest moves of God in the history of God. By Moses allowing God to work through him, not only would God be glorified, but the people would see God's work. And thusly it would cause them to believe in the Lord. God couldn't just tell them what he was going to do. And it wasn't good enough in their eyesight for Moses to testify to what God was going to do. In order for the Israelites to truly believe, God would have to show up in their life and thusly let them see his power at work right then and there. And I would suggest today that that's how many of us are. God has to show up and show out for us to believe in him. It's not enough that I stand here every Sunday and tell you about God's power. It's not enough for you to see God work in other people's lives or even witness to what he's already done in your life. It's not enough for these children to sing about the Lord's power. Some of us in this room will only believe once we have seen God work through. You know how some of y'all are. Some of y'all don't believe nothing. You don't believe the stove is hot until you touch it. You don't believe you get sick till you go outside without a coat on. You don't believe nothing until it literally happens. You didn't believe till you saw it for yourself. You didn't think he was going to see you through until he brought you through. Just like the Israelites, you didn't believe he was able to move in your life until he really moved. And I'm not just preaching against your lack of belief today, but what I am saying is that we ought to thank God that he thought enough of us to step in our lives and move some things around for us. We ought to be glad down in our soul that God stepped in and changed some stuff, eliminated some people, and moved some things around, and some people who were out to get us. We ought to be thankful that he took time to open up our Red Sea moment and take away the enemies that were coming up behind us. We ought to be glad that God stepped into our children's lives, stepped into our husband's life, stepped into our wife's life. And not only glad that he has done, past tense, but we ought to be glad that God continues to step in. Anybody know God continues to make ways, continues to bring things around, continues to turn. Just when you thought it was over, God stepped in. Just when you thought you were done, God stepped in. Just when you thought you were out for the count, God stepped in, pulled you back, and turned things. God has a way of stepping in family. God has a way of stepping in office buildings. God has a way of stepping into our situation. Cancer was behind you. Radiation was in front of you, but God stepped in. The stroke you suffered was behind you. Your rehabilitation process that you really didn't feel like going through was in front of you, but God stepped in. Troubled children were behind us. College education tuition was in front of us, but God stepped in. Messed up friendships were behind us, but us not having the desire to mend them was in front of us, but God stepped in. Sickness was behind us. Medication that we couldn't afford was in front of us, but God stepped in. Hatred was behind us. Enemies was in front of us, but God stepped in. Trial and tribulation was behind us. More trial and tribulation in front of us, but God stepped in. Didn't know how we were going to pay our bills behind us. More bills coming in front of us, but God stepped in. Girlfriend left me behind us. Another woman treated me wrong in front of us, but God stepped in. No count husband 1, 2, and 3 behind me. Some more no count men in front of me, but God. That's where the Israelites were during the time of this writing. They had no other choice but to watch God work and thusly become believers in the power that he was using to carry them through. Exodus 14, 19, 20 shows us even further the kind of power that the Lord used to carry the Israelites through this horrible situation. Listen and read along what it says. Then the angel of the Lord, who had been traveling in front of Israel's army, withdrew and went behind them. The pillar of cloud also moved from in front of them and stood behind them, coming between the armies of Egypt and Israel. Throughout the night, the cloud brought darkness to one side and light to the other side, so that neither went near the other all night long. God, in his infinite wisdom, used the pillar of cloud and the angel of God to confuse the Egyptians and to assist the Israelites. The angel of God came up behind them, and the Israelites, along with the pillar of cloud, which brought darkness to the Egyptians and light to the Israelites, which caused the Israelites to see where they were going. And this is what the Lord does for us. In many cases, the same item he uses to curse our enemies, he'll use to bless us. You missed that. The same thing that he uses to get our enemy, he'll use it to help us. No wonder God said, vengeance is mine, I shall repay. The same thing he uses to punish our enemies for what they do to us is the same thing he'll use. How many times God done the same thing for you? How many times have he given you light to see and darkness for your enemies to be blinded? How many times has he opened up doors in your face and shut the door in front of your enemy's face? How many times has he raised up and hushed up windows for you to see out and to get the air you need to breathe, and he shuts down the windows of your... How many times has he opened up doors and gave us light right in front of our enemy, and at the same time held them back from killing and destroying us? This is what the Lord did in the text, and this is what he does for us, and this is why we've been made to believe in him. The Bible explains in verses 21 and 22 how Moses was led by God to drive the water back, creating a wall on each side with a strong east wind, which caused the floor of the Red Sea to be dry, thusly causing the children of Israel to cross over on dry ground. It tells us right here in verses 23 through 25 is how the enemy pursued the Israelites by going into the sea after them. But it also talks about how the Lord caused the Egyptians to have a confusion among themselves, and how their equipment was destroyed, and by the time the enemy realized what was taking place, Lord, in verses 26 through 28, used Moses to cause the water to come back together, thusly killing the enemies of the Israelites. No wonder Exodus 14 records Moses, give it to me guys, telling the people to be not afraid. Stand firm. You will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today. No wonder he said in the latter portion of that same verse that the Egyptians you see today, you will never see again. And that draws us to the end of this passage, to the end of this sermon, right here in Exodus 14, 29 and 30, where the writer reiterates, but the Israelites went through on dry ground with a wall of water on their right and on their left. That day the Lord saved Israel from the hands of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians lying dead on the beachfront. Exodus 14, 11 through 12, these same Israelites were complaining and cussing, bickering and arguing. And by the time we get to Exodus 14, 31, the writer has to change his story. For now they've gone from complainers to believers, from cussers to worshipers, from no-count people to people who love the Lord. I love the Lord because he heard my cry and he pitied every groan. And as long as I live, while trouble rise, I'll hasten They were before they saw the power of the Lord in disbelief. Now right here in verse 31, they are a people who believe. Look at what it says, and I'm out of here. And when the Israelites saw the great power the Lord displayed against the Egyptians, the people feared the Lord. And they put their trust in him and in Moses, his servant. And that's all I need to say now. 49ers on their way on to the Super Bowl. But let me, if you will, suggest that God has a way of moving us from our disbelief. That's right, Karen. God will move you from your disbelief. These people didn't believe that God was going to see them through. They thought they were goners. They thought that everything was over for them. They thought they didn't stand a chance. But God stepped in and proved himself, showed them who was still in charge. And the same way he made believers out of them, it's the same way he's still making believers out of us. When you think you're almost done, God steps in and makes ways for you. When you think you're backed up against the wall, God steps in and makes ways out of no ways. When you get down in your wilderness experience, God will make a way. Anybody know today that we serve a God who will make a way? Anybody know today that we serve a God who will provide? Won't he make ways out of no ways? Won't he put food on your table, clothes on your back? Won't he put a roof over your head? Won't he open up Red Seas in front of you? Won't he heal your body? Won't he take care of your family? Only believe today. Only believe. God has the power, but you got to believe. God has the way, but you got to believe. God has the means, but you got to believe. All things that's as high as I'm going to get today. All things are possible if you only believe. I don't care what Red Sea you're going through, but God has a way. That y'all trying to mess with me. I don't care what you're facing, but God has a way. I don't care what the doctors say, but God has a way. I don't care what the lawyers say, but God has a way to open up your Red Sea, cause you to go over on dry ground. Ain't he all right?